Keys and now my peeps, I'm Statistical Del, and this is my true DPS calculator. Now before we even get started with the video, if you just want the calculator and don't care how it works or why it works, then click the link in the description below, subscribe to the channel and like the video, and it's all yours, free of charge. But if you're interested in understanding why it's so important, well, let's just dive right in. Incorrect DPS. You may have noticed the in-game DPS calculator on the schematics pages. You may have also noticed that it's somewhere between not quite right and completely incorrect, depending on the gun. Ever wondered why? Well, in a nutshell, it doesn't give a true representation of your gun for 4 reasons. Number 1, crit rate or damage. Fortnite's DPS stats do not include the probability of landing a crit or the amount of damage that crit will do. Number 2, non-permanent perks. Fortnite's DPS stats make no allowance for non-permanent and or elemental perks such as debilitating shots or make it rain, which can add as much as 45% damage or 50% fire rate. Number 3, reload time. Fortnite's DPS stats make no allowances for reload time, despite reload time having a huge bearing on damage during sustained fire. Number 4, guns with higher fire rates than magazine sizes. Guns with higher fire rates than magazine capacities seem to be able to fire while they are reloading and thus do not give true representations of your gun. Let me give you an example. The Freedom's Herald has a DPS of 18,125 according to the data in my collection book. So where has Fortnite got 18,125 DPS from? Well, it's simply multiplied the fire rate of 3 by the flat, non-crit damage of 6,041, which is entirely incorrect. In the field, due to the single shot clip, reload time also needs to be considered to give a true DPS score. It can only fire 1 shell before needing to reload, and thus we have to consider the reload time to give a true indication of its sustained firepower. But then this would still be wrong, because it is a high crit rate and high crit damage gun which hasn't been accounted for. And that's why you need this calculator if you really want to understand how powerful your guns are. So let's put the Freedom Herald data into the true DPS calculator and see what it's really capable of. So firstly, I need to slot my preferred hero, support and tactical heroes, then view the gun in the armory schematics. If I don't take these steps first, hero perks will not be reflected in the collection book and thus will not give a true representation of the Freedom Herald's base stats. Here's the Freedom Herald with everything slotted. Here's the Freedom's Herald without. Now I need to put the weapon data into the true DPS calculator exactly as it appears in the armory. Optionally, I can make adjustments for any non-permanent or elemental hero and weapon perks I wish to include, such as debilitating shots, make it rain, headshot damage, or damage to afflicted targets, etc, etc. Each instance will be unique, and it's really down to you and what you want to include or omit, depending on your comparison criteria. So what's the point in doing all this? Well, if like me you have a number of options in your loadout and you want to know which is the most powerful, it's perfect for comparing builds and weapon combinations. So again, in the case of the Freedom's Herald, I have 2 build options I want to consider and compare to see which is best. I'm running Ranger Beetlejuice as my main, and I have 2 options for my support slot. I have a Ranger Deadeye with a 24% pistol flat damage buff, or Trailblaster Buzz with a 70% critical damage buff. But which of these options will work out most powerful? Well, let's take a look. So here we have the Beetlejuice main and Ranger Deadeye support on the Freedom's Herald. And here we have the Beetlejuice main and Trailblaster Buzz support on the Freedom's Herald. We're presented with 4 key statistics for each build. Average damage per round, which tells us the average damage per single round including crit damage and crit rate. Average damage per second, which tells us how much damage the gun can do in 1 second, assuming it's loaded at the time, including critical damage and critical rate. Average damage per magazine, which tells us how much damage a full magazine burst will do, including crit damage and crit rate. And then there's the most important stat, true damage per second. Unlike DPS, true damage per second factors in reload time. So this figure is really giving us the sustained damage a gun will produce, including crit rate and crit damage. So in this instance, we can see that the Trailblaster Buzz build works best. Since this is a high crit rate gun, but with low innate crit, the Trailblaster Buzz crit damage buff is most beneficial. But if I switch the gun out, the results can be different. So in this instance, we have Beetlejuice main, Ranger Deadeye support on the Vendetta. And here we have Beetlejuice main, Trailblaster Buzz support on the Vendetta. I'm adding in 13.3% damage to both builds in the optional weapon multiplier, since the gun has the non-permanent 13.3% headshot damage perk, which won't otherwise be reflected in these stats. In this instance, we can see the Vendetta is slightly more powerful with Ranger Deadeye as support. Since the gun has a much lower crit rate, Ranger's flat damage perk works best. So the Freedom Herald works best with Buzz, but the Vendetta works best with Deadeye. And it just goes to show there is no one best build, as it depends on the combination of hero and weapon perks to get the best out of a gun. So my conclusions for this particular build are that Ranger works best overall, since I will be using the Vendetta more regularly than the Freedom's Herald, and thus the Vendetta damage increase is more important. But more so, the slight increase in Freedom's Herald damage is unlikely to affect wave clearing potential for low level mobs, since I'll more than likely one-hit them anyway, regardless of the additional crit damage Trailblaster Buzz offers. The true DPS score is the most accurate representation of your gun. Whatever figure it spews out will be a true reflection of your weapon's potential, but bear in mind it uses the maximum damage of a given gun, assuming you are firing within the maximum damage range. As soon as you step outside of this range, you'll start to see your damage decrease. But for the intents and purposes of comparison, that doesn't matter, because when you're comparing builds, the range deficits remain static and thus won't affect the comparative scores. I'm 99% confident it will work with every gun in the game, even those with fire rates above their magazine sizes or ammo costs above 1. Bear in mind, I've made this as a free tool in Excel format, so if you do spot any mistakes or have any ideas for improvements, then don't just downvote, don't be that guy. Do something productive that will benefit the community and let me know in the comments what the issue is, and I'll try and resolve it as best I can. There are a few limitations. The calculator doesn't include standard headshot or affliction damage, it won't work for melee weapons, and you will need to make manual adjustments for elemental or non-permanent perks. But I think that's a small price to pay for a tool which takes the guesswork out of selecting the best builds. The true damage per second score will give you the best indication of your gun's effectiveness in the field under sustained fire. And from my perspective, sustained fire is more important than the theoretical DPS score, which assumes a gun never crits and never has to reload. So give it a whirl with some of your builds and let me know what you think. There's a link in the description below which you can freely download, distribute and use without limitation. Indeed, please do feel free to forward on to your friends once you've downloaded it. The more people using it and the more feedback I get will help with further improvements. And if you have any questions, drop me a comment below. Be sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video and appreciate the calculator, and subscribe for more statistical shenanigans. And until next time, GG, well played, and laters fam. Laters.